All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Atlas Lens Co. Tuesday telecast. This week, I'm joined by Atlas President Forrest Schultz.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to the stream. Why don't you just start out by giving us a little background on, you're one of the co-founders of the company.
Mm-hmm.
What's that about? How'd that go?
Oh, yeah. Like a while back, I guess it would be either late 2015, 2016, I started experimenting with trying to make my own anamorphic. So I wanted to put together, and I think at that time I was just wanting to put together some sort of adapter. I had a cheap set of Rokinons that I would shoot with. I got up to the point where I had like a 6-lens set, and I just thought, hey, it'd be cool to try to like create my own adapter. And I sort of researched into what that would take, and then sort of found some supplies of either old projector lenses, some old glass off of like surplus shed, and I started to experiment, and then I realized, okay, this is working, this is what doesn't work. Trying to understand some of that principle. So I would take notes, and I got a little bit more serious about it. There was this app on my phone that you could like draw optical surfaces. So it was like,
oh, cool.
It was pretty cheap. It was like $6 or something, and then you could do stuff that basic ray tracing, you know. So I would recreate those elements that I had and do more tests and sort of predict what I should build next. And I started trying to create sort of a single focus adapter. That was what I call it, so that you move the element in the adapter and not in the lens, so you can just leave the lens alone.
Right.
So you don't have to do dual focus.
With a lot of these other adapters, especially like the earlier adapters, you have to be kind of focusing the anamorphic and the spherical lens at the same time.
Right.
So you're just kind of avoiding that step.
Yeah. I knew right away I would not be able to handle that in a shooting scenario.
Right.
With any certain amount of confidence. So I did do a few like prototypes of designs where I was kind of getting a 1.5 squeeze, and I some of them I really liked the look of it, so I was posting them on Vimeo and to the Blackmagic user forum, and through that I think I got Dan reached out to me and expressed that he liked the look of what was going on, and if I had any interest in talking to him more about potentially collaborating. And so I looked at that, and I took it more serious, so I flew out to go see him.
Where were you
California.
living?
I was in Salt Lake City at the time.
Oh, okay.
My mom had bought a house there. She used to live there as in her childhood. Maybe she was like 12, and only for like maybe 2 or 3 years her family lived in Salt Lake for a little bit in the Avenues, which is like the historic part above downtown. And she always remembers that house and the memories there. So there was one year, it was like 2013. I was visiting a friend in Salt Lake, and she went with me, and we were just kind of joking, like, you should get a house here again, and maybe. And there happened to be this house that was sort of way undervalued. It needed some work. It was like sort of hadn't been touched since the 60s, so all this carpet and everything. And I told her, like, hey, if you get it, I'll help you. I'll do all of that. I'll fix it for you. And so she lives there currently now. We renovated it. We redid the kitchen, took a wall open to make it
nice.
More, This was back when like your kitchen had basically the effect your stove was a chimney, so it had its own chimney system.
Wow. Okay.
And they kind of wanted it small because, you didn't want to be. It wasn't something like pretty to look at. Now people want to see their kitchen, so
Yeah. So you're in Salt Lake. You fly out to talk to Dan about lens design.
Yes. Yeah. We sit down, and we just sort of the first meeting we just sort of meet casually, get to know each other, and open up that friendship. So throughout 2016 we would share ideas, text back and forth. I would try something new based on an idea we had together, and that slowly morphed from focusing on trying to do an adapter to what we envisioned would just be a better cohesive product, which would be a prime, because with an adapter there's so many variables with what host lens you're going to put it on. They technically can't be optimized for any lens, so
right. It's very general.
There's a range, right? There's a range of focal lengths that it might work well under, but it's very much you can't give the customer exactly a guarantee that, hey, you're gonna have the best experience if you use this. It only works if you know what they're using. So a prime allows you to at least give them the whole package, and then we got to a point where we knew we were working towards that, and so I just shifted everything I knew into. At that point, I had learned ZMax, and we brought on another team member, which was Scott DeWald. He's one of our optical engineers who's in Texas. And
ZMAX is the lens design software.
Yeah, ZMAX is the professional ray tracing software. It's one of the more popular ones. I say professional, but I guess it's just one of the more common ones. You can trust it. It's scientific in that regard, or it's vetted, I would say. It's been around since, I think, late 80s or 90s.
Oh, wow.
Or
Okay.
something.
Very established.
Yeah. The math doesn't change, really, so the program itself is just really getting interface updates, but you can really use it and play it. I learned it by experimenting and seeing what was working and what wasn't working. And then I got some guidance along the way, of course, and that's helped sort of honed in how I use it today.
Awesome. So you're kind of developing this prime. When did this kind of general design become the first Orion?
Oh, the first Orion. Ooh, it was like that. Oh man, it would have been late. Oh, like later half of 2016. I think we were working towards that. I'm trying to remember because I know that we went. Yeah, because what we ended up doing was finishing it right before NAB of 2017, which was in April. So there was sort of this sprint from the end of 2016 to get the physical model and glass built and assembled right before the show. And we only had enough to make 3 at the time. So all of our investment, all of the time and energy was put into those 3. So we were very protective of the first 3. We didn't want to lose one of them. I don't know. We had, because at the time no one was doing this anamorphic stuff. I think now, and if another anamorphic lens popped up at a show, it was brand new. There's not this idea of, whoa, that's the only thing now. There's a lot of options. But back then, in 2017, there weren't other manufacturers on the show floor showing off different anamorphics. So I just remember that being very protected. I mean, it was probably Dan and I hyped it up in our heads. So we were basically handcuffing ourselves to the cases.
Very Secret Service.
I was very much on check with it. Yeah. The most we did is we put one on a DJI crane or drone, or they had some sort of setup in their booth. And that was the only one that got far away from us for the early days.
Very cool. So once you have this first Orion, right, how are you adapting this design to work with other focal lengths?
After the first 65?
Yeah.
Well, what we looked at was sort of the look that we were achieving. So you get some metrics in ZMAX of the spot diagram, the MTF, you can sort of understand the field curvature, distortion. And so we knew we wanted a 3 lens set at least to release first. So you sort of lean your learnings one direction to say, this is what it's going to take to make this more telephoto. You have different aberrations you got to kind of worry about. Spherical aberration becomes your enemy when you go to telephoto.
Sure.
And field curvature and size, generally speaking, how big is the element going to get, becomes the other enemy when you go to wide angle. So you have to employ a few different designs or changes to the surfaces to sort of to cater to those needs for spherical aberration or on the wide end. So
gotcha. So it's kind of just different priorities depending on the focal length.
Yeah. So in the case of the 40, we would add some elements and move some things and then re-optimize, but we were trying to keep the basic character of what we were seeing through those metrics, like the color, the aberration, or the spot diagram.
That's really interesting that you're talking about the character of a lens as data points. Because I think a lot of people, our customers, like me especially, it's more about the kind of subjective character. It's more of a feel thing. So it's interesting to hear that when you're constructing this, it's very literal.
Yeah, I won't describe a lens as juicy or something like that. I'll probably never say that. But I've heard all these kinds of things where it's hey, maybe it feels that way. But
But it's an emotional reaction.
It is. And I have to look for the technical reason typically, so that if it's important to recreate it, I don't want it to be lost on us. You don't want to be in a position where I like this, but I don't know how to achieve that. So you can put things on the projector and see a lot of these things, like the stuff I'm describing in the spot diagram. You don't need the computer to do it per se. You could take a pinhole and image that, or a pinhole at different field points, and you can kind of get a sense of that. That's what the spot would end up looking like.
Sure.
So
interesting. So you have these lenses, you're kind of starting to build the company. What did the early days of the company look like?
We got an industrial unit early on in Santa Clarita. So that was after we took the pre-orders. We knew that, all right, we're going to start to have to prepare for delivering product. And so up in Santa Clarita, Dan had found a pretty good deal. So we got a unit, which was not much bigger than like your typical garage, maybe a little deeper. And it did have one front office, but that was where the only AC was. So we would just leave the door open to like try to AC the whole place, which half worked. And like in the summer it didn't work too well. But so we'd actually just have to have the roll door up. I think luckily it was on the side where the sun doesn't hit till like last or something. So, it stayed cooler in the mornings. That was where we shipped from for the first, up until 2018.
Wow. So, yeah.
Yeah. In middle of 2018, we changed and got a different place. Tiffin was kind enough to sort of rent us some of their space at their.
That's right.
At their location.
Yeah, I've heard about this. This was before my time with the company, but it was kind of a while where you guys were in the Tiffin building.
Yeah. Yeah, and that came about just because I think in Cinegear, they do a special event where you get to go into the building and they kind of do a sale for different items in the lobby. They open up some of the offices, or at least back then they did. The offices became almost like testing rooms. So we were in one of those.
Okay.
And I remember peeking around and I noticed like all these offices are kind of empty. I wonder if like someone used to be here. I think Airy used to be there before us.
Gotcha.
But they weren't there anymore. So I looked and so we were trying to figure out how to get out of the garage. And I had mentioned maybe we should ask Tiffin what they would charge us because I was like, maybe they have that space.
They got the space, yeah.
And what we didn't know, they also had a cool like assembly space in the back too. And
that makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, that's essentially like what you see with our production now. Just imagine like kind of like a smaller version of it. There was even one side that was a projector wall because Ari also used a projector wall.
Oh yeah, okay.
So there was no room that divided it, but there was just a narrow doorway that if you went on the other side, it was dark enough because if you turned out the lights, most of the wall blocked off that room.
Amazing. So let me look at my questions here. So when you were first kind of getting into lens design, was the intention always anamorphic, or were you doing anything with spherical? How'd you get into like building lenses in the first place?
In what era? What back when?
For you personally, like getting into lenses at all?
I knew enough to know that like I couldn't just mock up a spherical lens. That I think I understood from researching, where it's like this isn't just like, if I buy this element, I'm going to make this really good. Making a spherical lens, there's a lot of correction that's going on with each element, and just minute changes already matter so much. So whatever the person who designed the lens intended is probably the best version of that spherical lens. So you can do things to them, of course, to like change some of the attributes, but you're probably never going to make like it better or focus better than it was for the nominal design. So my interest was primarily in adding on top of the
Gotcha.
The spherical base, making it more of an adapter situation, and that's true with anamorphic design today too. You kind of have to have a good spherical base, and it doesn't have to be perfect though. With design with cohesive design like what we have with the Orions, you can put emphasis on other elements so that as a whole it works together. If you take that all away and try to use just a portion of the lens, it probably wouldn't perform as well. But there's nothing that prevents you from doing it also in segments like stages. So if you break open any anamorphic lens, you'll find what is sort of the core of that lens, which is its spherical component. So that drives a lot of what's going to go on and what kind of distortion the lens needs to be corrected for, how much field coverage it's going to have. So that's sort of the heart of the lens still, in a way. The second, I guess, piece of the heart of the lens would be the anamorphic elements themselves. They have to pair well with that spherical group.
Gotcha. That's interesting to hear you say that. We do have our one set of serious lenses. For anyone who doesn't know, that was our April Fool's joke lenses, where they're effectively just Orions with the anamorphic elements removed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, because they do behave pretty differently from Orions. The way that I think about a lot of it is the spherical aberration. There's kind of some interesting glow, especially around the edges, that isn't really present in the Orions. The contrast is different. So it's interesting to hear that you're not just removing those elements and there's no consequences besides the squeeze. It does significantly change the character.
Yeah, because it's not a linear change either. So you can probably bring it back into focus at the center, and then you're left with, okay, what are the residual aberrations here at the edge? So there's one of those serious lenses that in my opinion, doesn't work really at all, just because it's a little too much like that. Like it's like a shot if you're looking through the glass. Like a telescope or something.
Just only the middle works.
Like a pirate scope. The middle's okay, and then all of a sudden it's got a ton of coma. And that's because it's missing this whole pack of anamorphics that are sort of helping bend that light into place.
So it's not only the elements aren't only de-squeezing, you're also kind of adding in corrections.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Let's see here. A question coming in here. Can you tell us about future lens sets? Loving the Mercuries. Any chance for large format 1.8? Or something to get 239 on LF. So the Mercuries will actually get you 239 on LF depending on your shooting mode. Typically, especially on a 16:9 sensor, that's kind of what they're designed for, is my understanding.
That's what those were designed for. It was a way into getting what is commonly the full frame approach, which was 16:9 extracts of full frame. And if you shoot that, that can take you up to I think that takes you to 266, which you can crop, but you're not losing a whole lot. And I know that a lot of people are interested in closer to a 2x squeeze full frame component, which would probably be a different extraction mode. Of course, we've looked at that, and that's because you kind of take your full frame. Probably don't want to use the whole thing because it's going to be like over 3-to-1 ratio.
Exactly.
Crazy. So,
yeah.
But if you use that 4:3 extraction mode of the full frame, I can't reveal anything or say, but definitely there's things to be excited about that we're doing.
Yeah. I think also I would argue that the Orions are kind of a good option for that already.
Right.
The coverage is good, and we have the 1.4 expander to kind of get that in between when you need to. Some of the wider lenses will vignette on full frame, and that's what that's for. So
that's true. And so if you don't know about it already, we do have the expander, which does take the current Orions, it maintains their character and their look. It just helps you cover the full frame cameras of the day. And to the person who asked the question, please, continue to watch what we're doing. We have stuff that we're working on.
Definitely. Yeah, that's one of the fun things about working here is there's always a million little things going on in the background where it's like, you're working on what? Obviously, we can't talk about that too much publicly, but it's very fun. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the history a little bit. Now we're getting into Mercury. What was the intention behind Mercury? How does the design kind of differ from the Orions? What was the approach like there?
The Mercury was it was me going back to that kitchen and what I was doing with the experiments. So in a way, a Mercury was another form of this. Okay, so I was doing synchro focus, which is short for synchronous focus, where you'd have to move the back and the front. I was lying when I said I didn't want to do that. There was a point when I was like, there was a point when I knew maybe making a prime, this is an efficient way to do things. It's one way to solve something, but you have to solve for the astigmatism. So,
gotcha.
And I can talk about this now because our patent is out there, so it's really it's not a secret anymore, and it's nothing.
Yeah, it's too late. You can't steal it now.
Yeah. So I didn't know that I was doing something where I was using this compensator element, but from the patents that I had seen in the past, they didn't teach me that. They taught other things, but I was like, how can I solve the astigmatism but do it in an efficient way? And I started experimenting with a particular type of compensator, which is now how we use it in the Mercury. And this sits between the cylinder elements, so it makes a really small, compact package. And by moving the rear element, the rear spherical, with this compensator element at a particular rate, You can achieve astigmatism correction. You don't get any mumps.
So you're moving multiple elements to achieve focus at the same time.
Yeah,
and it's helping you correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the relationship is sort of it's non-linear on one of them, and it helps you correct.
Oh, okay. So they're moving at different rates.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so that I can see how that would be very difficult earlier on when you don't have as many resources to kind of do that much mechanical engineering.
Right. Early on, I was just putting them on these sliders, little like dovetails, and I would move them by hand. But I couldn't like recreate that, right? Mm-hmm. Unless I hooked it up to some sort of mechanism, which at the time I was just sort of, it wasn't investing all my time into that because of course I was still using pre-made optics to find these things out.
Right.
So it wasn't like,
you don't have any of your own custom designs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just took it to where I learned about it. But in a way, when we did the Orions, I put that on sort of a shelf and was like, this would be interesting to come back to. So when we decided to do the Mercuries, I recalled that, and then with the help of Scott and now Merve, who's another one of our optical designers, but at the time I think it was just Scott with us, we were moving along this design with what I had started with, which was a mock-up in the kitchen. And I had to prove to him, I was like, it works because I saw it work, because there were some questions in the beginning of if it's even viable. Like, it just sounded too silly, or it's just too simple.
Right. It's because
other solutions were proposed outside of that, and it's like those are what you see historically, but this one just was pretty, it was unique to it, and so it allowed us to continue to use it. It works for pretty much any focal length, and then we ended up putting it into a patent because we thought we might as well do that because it is unique.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Here's a question. What's your favorite set to shoot on between Orions and Mercuries?
That depends. I thought it would be Mercuries ever since we finished the Mercuries and they were out. But I recently my cousin wanted to shoot a music video.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing this.
Yeah, and I chose the Orions because I wanted a like sort of quintessential classic format or something to sort of as a callback to like what would have been available in the 60s and 70s.
Ah, sure.
And so I feel when I think about it that way, I think about the Orions providing me that option, that look. But
I guess it kind of depends on the project.
Yeah. I would say though that doesn't make it my favorite because they are sort of heavier and there's more effort in doing it. Doing it alone is like watch me take off this heavy lens and then watch me put this lens away and get another heavy lens. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just like that's the nature of professional lenses.
Definitely.
General. Versus with Mercury, you can get that, you can have that experience, but you're like, hey, I can hold two. Watch me juggle this lens. And put it on camera really quick.
Definitely.
So I would definitely gravitate to shooting, and I do want to. My next thing I do want to shoot with Mercuries. So my next itch is to do that. But I guess I'd say I like them equally. That's a better way to put that. I don't see it as a one over the other.
Yeah, I think they're different enough that I tend to use them for different things. I think that's kind of the best way to put it.
Yeah.
All right. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but in my research, I found that lens design typically just comes down to trade-offs where you're introducing this thing and then you have to correct for this other thing and then you want to add in this and that takes away from that. So one thing that we see like really commonly, especially with like photographic lenses, is the faster a lens is, right? The wider the aperture, maybe the lens gets bigger, or maybe the focal length changing gives you different attributes. You're kind of introducing different things. So how are these? What are the most important elements to you when designing Orion or Mercury, and what kind of trade-offs are you making? What are you correcting for to get those things?
That's a good point. The issue of the chief ray comes up a lot. The chief ray is just your maximum ray angle that is required to project, to get onto your sensor, to make it through the optical system.
Gotcha.
So that would be in the sense of like full frame. That would be the corner of your full frame. You have to account for where's the chief ray of that. The light that ends up there, where does that come out of the front of the lens at? And so you sort of can work it backwards or look at it in that aspect, and you have to control that. Just because with a spherical, you might get away with a lot of different designs where you have a really big front element. you can also get away where you have a smaller front element, and you can see that they'll still be the same focal length, and you wonder what's going on there. Like, if it has the same field of view, technically the chief ray is still getting out of there at the same angle, but it's at the end of the path. So, but what you want to do is, I would say you want to control that, because with an anamorphic, it's just going to get bigger. You know, you're not making it smaller by adding anamorphic elements than you would. So that's something that we constantly are looking at, which is with the Mercuries. That was kind of interesting because we really wanted to fit it within this 95 OD barrel. So controlling the chief ray, figuring out optically how to do that with the spherical design, and with everything sort of being cohesive, because it's all together. You know, there's no way to. You can start with them separate, but once you're doing it, you're like, oop, this cylinder is getting really big, and it's, you know, it's a conversation of, do you want to make the lens that big? And typically, if you don't have to, you don't want to.
Definitely. And I think that's one thing we see on a lot of other brands' lenses, especially like older ones, is anamorphics can get huge.
Right.
I think that's something that, working here, I definitely appreciate that didn't so much happen with our lenses, because I have to carry them around all day.
there's definitely, historically, there's definitely bigger lenses than the Orions or any. I'm only going to speak about lenses that I think they're out of production, so
sure,
no offending, you know.
Of course, yeah.
No, there's the Ariscopes, which have their own built-in, like, welded-on handle. You know, it's just it's like a rod that's bent and then welded, or I'd say it's welded. Maybe it's attached, and someone could get mad at me, but it's basically this tank, you know, this huge cylinder that you grab, and I thought that was cool, you know, and
hard to work with, but
and kudos to the PL mount, you know, manufacturers, because people will hang those things off the camera with no camera support too.
Yeah,
There you go, 20 pounds just ready to go, or whatever it is.
Terrifying. Yeah. I mean, we'll do that occasionally. I mean, even like some of our bigger lenses are still half that weight, and I still get nervous. Like, it's
so shout out to you PL mount engineers, because you know people are going to overstress that mount. They'll hang a car on it if they could, you know, just for the shot.
Sometimes you're just, I don't know. I always love when you're no longer mounting the lens to a camera. You're putting the camera on the lens, you know?
That's what it felt like with some of these older things that we tested. But, that it's a consideration is size, because you can let the design push you around and optimize out to any length. And of course, it's just going to get bigger, right? Because that same angle needs to be maintained. So you can let it do that, but then you kind of go, are we going to produce a lens this big or this long? So for that, with the Mercuries, it became sort of a new way of looking at that challenge. And even with the Orions, I mean, that's why the Orions are all maintained to be the same OD, except for the wider ones. But I mean, with those ones, it's just,
there's no choice.
You don't have any control over it anymore. You have to make it bigger.
I mean, that's here we go. Was it physically impossible to make a wider Mercury than 36 millimeter? It's a good question.
No, and then we'll move on. We'll go.
Yeah, move on.
Just kidding.
It's not impossible. No more. No comment.
No comment. No. It is not impossible.
I think right now it's the widest Mercury is the 36 millimeter, and we can leave it at that. Another question. Let's see here. Movie of the summer: Twisters or Harold and the Purple Crayon?
Go ahead.
I love Twisters. I haven't seen Harold and the Purple Crayon yet, but I'm excited, because why is a grown man playing Harold?
I've only seen certain memes around this. Like, I haven't. It's been a while since I've been like excited to go to the movies, so I need to get out there and watch.
There's been a lot of good stuff this year. I'm pretty. We talked about it on the stream last week, but I don't know. I think for a long time I was very burned out by all the superhero movies, and I'm like, wait, movies are back. Like, there's good movies again. People are doing like mid-budget, like standalone, no franchise. So I'm excited about the state of movies right now. Let's see here. How does wiggle room or having a little bit of play from the mount affect your image? I mean, on anamorphic, it makes a big difference.
If it's just shifting around and it's staying flat to the mount, that's not a big problem. Then you're just changing how the image is centered, which you may not notice once you're locked down or if you're not moving it around. If it's tilting at any degree, it's really bad. Just
really
because you go through all this effort, like I said, with these last elements, all these elements around the stop, where their curvature matters when we're talking down to microns. So if you tilt your lens out and the mount isn't perfectly flattened to the sensor, all those corrections don't mean anything because they're landing before they get to the sensor or after they get to the sensor. So you're going to have...
Right, yeah, you're kind of planning for it to be in this one spot, and if it's even a little bit off one way or the other...
Your focal plane isn't matching up with your sensor plane. And so, yeah, that can be pretty detrimental.
I just had this problem with a customer who was borrowing some lenses recently. The mount on his camera was shimmed improperly, so it's a back focus issue where a lot of people know about shimming your lens to be optimally sharp, but people forget that also applies to your camera body. Now on a spherical lens, this usually isn't an issue. It like kind of just changes.
They just change where you start.
Yeah, exactly. So like maybe your focus marks don't hit, but you'll still be able to find focus. But with anamorphic, it's a very different story. So he was emailing us like, hey, like the image isn't sharp no matter what I do. But we put on these spherical lenses and they worked fine. Like, are the lenses broken? I think it's kind of an interesting, kind of the same thing like you're talking about, where like the tilt matters because you're kind of changing just the top or the bottom. But if the whole thing is shifted back and forth too, it's maybe even a bigger problem. It's
right.
Yeah.
That's because when you focus a spherical lens, you're moving that focal plane uniformly. But with an anamorphic, you're dealing with two disparate focal lengths. So you're dealing with two disparate focal planes in a way. The plane where the horizontal image converges, which is what's powered through the anamorphic, and that's got a, let's say, effectively a shorter focal length. But then you have the vertical plane, and you have both of those converging at one point in a really real plane in air, right? And that only exists there. So when you focus the lens, you actually have to be at that plane. There's no like hunting for it. So with the spherical, you're able to find you have different answers for a spherical lens just because it's uniformly shifting that focal plane around. But what happens with the anamorphic is if you're not in that particular zone, there is no coming together. So you instantly get astigmatism, and it stays there. It stays there by the amount that you're off on your back focus. So if it does feel weird, if it feels like things are coming together sort of horizontally first and then vertically after, either the lens wasn't shimmed correctly or possibly the camera mount itself isn't at 52 millimeters.
And again, with a lot of this lens design stuff, that when we say millimeters, even a tiny fraction of a millimeter off is a major difference.
It needs to be better than like 10 microns within the range of 52.
Yeah, no, that's the trickiest thing is, we'll test it and it'll be like just a couple microns off, especially like you're saying, typically within 10 microns, it's usually fine. But beyond that, in my experience, I really start to notice a pretty major issue. All right, I'm going to see what other questions I had. For anyone who's like just getting into lens design and making their own adapters, how would you recommend somebody get into that as a hobby?
Well, you can definitely do eBay, hunting. There's there's still, I think, a lot of projector lenses that are no longer in use because this comes from the film era when you would de-squeeze at the theater. So these elements that de-squeeze are also the same elements that squeeze. And if someone wants to sort of play around with, making an adapter, I think you can start with that. You need to also have some way to focus it. So if you're looking to focus it within the adapter, you need to create a pairing of elements to do that for you if you're going to go with the single focus method. There's a lot of creators and stuff through the Anamorphic Shooters group that have worked on stuff like this. So if you go to Facebook, look up Anamorphic Shooters group, you'll see pretty much how this is done. And it'll have pictures of people attempting it and doing it, and they can look really good.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't know. It's always something I've been like kind of loosely interested in, but it's definitely kind of an intimidating prospect.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to find a way to like hold them. So what I did was I
Mhm.
3D printed little cells, so I measured the element, and that hot glue is your friend too with optics.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good way of just sticking it together and going, I don't like that, and then just pop off the hot glue. But I would do that, so I'd put them in these 3D printed holders, glue them in, hot glue them in, because I didn't want to super glue glass. And I wasn't using retainer clips at the time, just fast and loose. So, but then I got a dovetail. I call it dovetail. It's like the kind, not Arca Swiss. There's another. Maybe it is Arca Swiss. It's like used in photography for.
Oh yeah.
They're about, I don't know, an inch and a half wide or something.
I think
they're very cheap, and then they sell clamps and clips. So I would basically make the 3D printed cells be able to clamp onto the rails. So that helps you hold it perpendicular. And then I'd often get like construction paper and just wrap it over like a like a train tunnel or something over the top. Yeah.
Instead of like your full lens housing, you're just just enough to keep the light leaks away.
It was a hood. It was like a lens hood for the whole thing. Yep. And then I would go outside and record. So that was how I did that.
Awesome. Yeah. Another question here. Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, Forrest is the barbecue guy here at Atlas. What is the best cut of meat to smoke?
Was that on there? Or is it?
Yeah, someone on the Instagram is asking.
Oh, okay. All right. People would say brisket. I had trouble doing brisket until like just a week ago when I brought some in. I took pictures of just the outside because it has to come out a certain way for me to prove it, because I've had good brisket. And so I would say probably brisket, but my personal favorite, like that I think is still the best thing. If you can do a good brisket, you've made it or something. Here, I hope I can repeat it. My favorite though is probably pork shoulder, or it's called pork butt, but it's technically the
right. Yeah.
Those are good because you really can't mess it up. It makes really good pulled pork. So you get the cool bark on the outside because it collects the smoke. That smoke ring penetrates and it just sits there for a long time cooking or smoking. I would say it's fun and easy to do pork butt.
Amazing. You've also been doing like some really good vegetarian stuff lately, which I appreciate.
I have some other stuff in mind for that too.
I'm excited. Yeah, it's always every once in a while Forrest will just show up with a car full of barbecue and like, hey guys, I brought food. It's great. It's amazing.
Exactly. That's an excuse for me to make it, because otherwise I'm not going to eat it all and I'm going to let it go to waste.
Yeah.
No. It's like, if you make this and it's good, I want to share it. If it isn't good, you've also been saved from bad barbecue too.
Oh really?
I have. Yeah. Oh yeah. The 5 briskets I'm talking about that no one got to try. There's a reason why no one saw those. I ate a little bit of it. My family had some. But I wouldn't bring them in. I only bring stuff I'm proud of, I guess.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think you should be. I've been very happy with everything you've brought in. So.
I see the come to Texas for some. I definitely.
Yeah.
I got my cousin out there. Is that him? Yeah, I think that's my cousin.
There you go.
Yeah.
Time to go visit.
He wants. Yeah, I got to go out and visit him. He's out there. There's a place called Goldie's, which is like, it pops up a lot on videos because they were written in as Texas #1 or something. So I learned a lot of my tricks from watching how they do stuff. So I'm trying to emulate the process.
Definitely. All right. Well, before we wrap up here, is there anything in the works that you can reveal publicly? Is there anything you can kind of tease towards? Totally fine if not.
I can definitely say there will be new products, new series, new things to look out for. That's the mission and the goal of Atlas, is to provide as many options to the filmmaker, to the creator, and we really spend time in making sure that it's something that we internally would use and are proud to use. It's not just about hitting metrics or anything on a paper, but really about providing a specific look and something that gives you a reason and sort of, I don't know, I want to use the word joy. Like, it gives you joy to use them. Great joy. No, it doesn't. Sorry. My bad. It's something that really just more like, it has to be special. And then when we find that, that's what you get excited about. That's what I think we get excited about internally. And by proxy, that's what we want to share to the public. So we're striving to continue to do that through our products, through our existing line, which is why I think it's cool that we still support even our first one, Orion. That's, we got the 2 new focal lengths that came out.
Definitely, yeah.
The telephotos, if people haven't seen those enough, the 200 is really amazing. And that is something that we'll continue to do, is to be able to serve and provide for any one of those families, even the future ones too, so people can kind of rely on that.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I had a good time. I think this was a good interview. For anyone watching at home who wants to test out any of our lenses, we do our open house every Wednesday, 10:30 to 1:30 at our headquarters in Glendale. And we do another one of these streams every Tuesday at 11:30. So yeah, stop by next week. Thank you guys so much for checking in, and thank you, Forrest, for coming on today.
Thank you, B.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone have a good day. See ya.